I'll get this one right now, as far as introduction of Graham, because not many years ago, but quite a few years ago, Graham came up to Edinburgh to experience the festival, and I managed also to educate him about single malt whisky very late at night. And unfortunately what it did, he took advantage of me and asked me to speak at, in those days I think it was Handheld Learning, which is now moved to Learning Without Frontiers. Graham Brown Martin, now I've sort of got him back and said, right, you got me, you have to come here and talk and tell us about your area of expertise. But Graham, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I thought it was the last time I gave a talk at Edinburgh Interactive, I think it was around 2006. And I was talking about disruption, and I was talking about how I believed that desktop PCs and laptops were over, and that we would, by 2010, be storing things in the cloud, and we'll all be using mobile devices and everything else. The result of that was that I got incredibly flamed at a highly personal nature on a variety of websites by 40-year-old teenagers with a penchant for filling their PCs full of neon. I'd like to read one of the flames, because they're still online, actually, and I just wonder what will happen after this talk. There is some swear words in here, but I'm just reading verbatim, okay, so I apologise in advance. Consultant Graham Brown Martin sounds like a major fucking idiot, and someone should be allowed to take this retarded publicity-seeking prediction and shove it 10 inches up his fat ass in 4 years. Just make some wild shit up, and so you'll get noticed. Yeah, like I want to store all my personal data on the internet and trust a corporation with it. I know lots of people that are still paranoid about using credit card online, not saying they're right, just commenting on their paranoia and trust level. I hate when shit like this gets attention. It's just garbage.
Sorry about that, Graham.
And I mean, there's a load of those. It's quite funny, really, and there were quite a bit. So I'm not really here to make predictions so much, although I would like to say to that arsehole that I was right, he was wrong. But Napsterfication, I apologise in advance for that word, because it just sounds like another one of those buzzwords, like the other awful term, gamestification, which we're going to hear about later. Just a joke, Cam, sorry. But Napsterfication, it came out of I was doing a speaking tour across the US and Europe and the Middle East earlier this year, and I used this word Napsterfication as a sort of throwaway comment, and it became a really big topic, so I sort of turned it into a blog post flying home, and then the blog post on our website got like 500,000 hits and unique visitors over like 3 days, and I thought, wow, this is really funny, so I thought I'd sort of turn it into some kind of talk, and then maybe I'd get paid for saying it, although I'm not being paid here, I hasten to add. So I'm going to launch into this, and you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to be speaking very much, because what I'm trying to do is illustrate some of this with a number of videos, some of which you recognise, and although it's about learning, I think you may, for those in the games industry, see some perhaps corollary in here in terms of disruption and what disruption really means for an existing industry, the game industry, and what's going to happen. But I'm using this in the context of learning, which is the background of myself and Learning Without Frontiers. So we're going to start off with a video clip here.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The Matrix.
Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison before your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more. Follow me. Take off.
So a little tale, most of us in the Matrix, I hope, and you know, it's a fun story, and it's really, whether you believe in all the psychobabble, it's really about disruption. It's about understanding, you know, the habits that we form, you know, whether it's an existing industry, whether it's a superstructure like education or capitalism. It's very difficult to think outside of that because it's embedded within ourselves. And so that's really what that story is about. So just to get an idea of whether this could be a really short presentation here, it could be a long one. Show of hands, whom, you know, you take the blue pill and we just stop and we wake up and just carry on and just as if nothing happened. Or we could take the red pill and carry on with the talk. So who wants to take the blue pill? Red pill? Okay, you're red pill takers. That's fantastic because we need lots of red pill takers right now. Disruption then. You know, it's a word that's become very hip and trendy to talk about disruption, although clearly not in 2006 when I got flamed. And some interesting, you know, some quotes. It's always good to have a few quotes in a talk like this. And the poet William Thompson is a good one. You know, the conscious purpose of science is the control of nature. Its unconscious effect is disruption and chaos. Tom Robbins, sort of beat poet as well. You know, true stability results when presumed order and presumed disorder are balanced. A true stable system expects the unexpected. It's prepared to be disrupted, waits to be transformed. So let's talk about some of those issues here. You know, disruption is about discontinuity. Disruption is something that's very misunderstood. Some people think of disruption and confuse it with displacement. And I'll come to some of those things in a minute in the education area. It causes disorder. It causes changes of business models. It's painful. It's something that we, you know, often like to resist. It's not sentimental. It takes no prisoners, etc. Why have I got a beer glass and a car there? Because actually, the glass, you know, started off as something we made out of metal. We now make it out of glass, regardless of how dangerous they are on a Friday evening or a Saturday evening when people start smashing them and hurting each other. We maintain that glass. There's been no disruption in that. We've displaced by using different technologies. The car, even if we go to electric cars, that isn't really a disruption. It might be a disruption of the oil industry, but it's not a disruption of how we move around. So real disruptions change everything quite dramatically. An example, take the iPhone as a disruption. Why, in my opinion, was that disruptive? I mean, it's just a phone, right? So it doesn't other things, but it did disrupt a number of things. It changed the relationship between the consumer and the operator. You remember back in the day, you had to produce, if you were producing a game or whatever on mobile devices, you'd have to go through operators. You had to do like 70, 90 different versions of it, and so on. Apple completely disrupted. It was take it or leave it. You want this phone? You have it our way, and so on. It changed our concept of the mobile phone to a mobile communicator. We rarely see people doing this as much as doing this. It's disrupted that. It's changed the way we use the internet. I'll put some clever graphs up in a second because I think that's de rigueur for these kinds of events. It redefined the software industry. We went from the days of quite happily shelling out 300 quid for a box that had a disc in it or something like that, to then going to $3.99 on an app store. Sent every manufacturer, every handset manufacturer that wanted to stay in business, back to the drawing board. Nokia, dead as a consequence of this. Will it change, and has it changed, and could it change the way we learn? I mean, I've spent a good part of my career talking at global education summits and so on, and everyone's talking about, oh yes, mobile, video games, and so on. And yet what we try to do is then the conversation, how do we fit that into existing teaching practice? Not how do we change teaching practice to respond to the world in which young people are living in. And we're constantly shoehorning the 21st century into the 19th century. And that's a major problem. And what I want to know is where the disruption is going to come from. Give some examples of the kind of crap that we're putting into education systems around the world right now and thinking that they're good. The interactive whiteboard is a piece of technology for the chronologically displaced. This is a piece of technology that says, oh, we have a chalkboard which costs £25, we'll make a digital one where we can project shit. What you get lazy, boring, dull teachers. We wonder why kids are rioting. It's probably because they're completely bored. Kids misbehaving in school, completely bored. If you went to your work and you had to spend 8 hours every day sitting in front of PowerPoint slides, you would be bored. And this is what's happening. And it's perfect because we have an Education Secretary of State who actually wants to turn teachers into factory workers. Okay, where here is the raw material, here is the processing factory, you, the teacher, are the factory worker, here's the burger flipping manual for flipping the kids, put them in the system and get them through a quality assessment like you're making spoons. The interactive whiteboard works perfectly for that. Learning platforms. I don't know if those involved in learning, virtual learning environments. These are nothing to do with personalised learning. These are systems which allow teachers to go click, click, clickety-click. It's a digital Gestetner. Those of you who are old like me remember the Gestetner, right? That's all they are in digital form. This is bullshit. Education software. So boring your grandmother would die using it. 20th century and 21st century supporting 19th century teaching practice. It's just reinforcing. It's not changing learning. That's why schools today look the same as they did 100 years ago. My 10-year-old daughter said to her 79-year-old grandmother at Christmas, Nana, what was school like when you were a kid? Probably the same as yours, she said. That's a real problem. So let's have a look.
To parent-teacher meetings goes many a bewildered Olsen.
Now hold on, Miss Fox. It's all very well to teach my boy to paint pretty pictures and build birdhouses, but he doesn't even know his multiplication table.
For generations, U.S. youngsters went to school because they had to. And most communities boasted but one room and a single teacher with which to educate their entire and assorted progeny.
Good morning, children.
Good morning,
The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures.
Johnny learned his multiplication tables as his father and grandfather had before him, through endless classroom drills.
2 times 6 is 12. 3 times 6 is 18.
By the same process, he learned the...
Right, we'll stop that there in the interest of time. So how much has it changed by 2011? I mean, I think I've already given away that in my previous statement. The fact is, it hasn't really changed much. I mean, there's two things here. What is the purpose of schooling, and what was the purpose of learning? They're very different. The purpose of schooling is effectively I can boil it down to a summary of 2 sentences. Somewhere to dump your kids while you're at work, so you can be good citizens to earn money so you can consume. Somewhere for the kids to be culturally reproduced so they can become good citizens and then go to work and return to coda. That's the purpose of schooling. And it's it's an unpalatable thing to accept. But for me, that's the reality. I'm very happy to have an argument about that over lunch. Purpose of learning, I think, is somewhat different. Purpose of learning is at its most simple thing, the survival of the species, but also meeting your potential and going out there and being able to create as much as you consume, as opposed to creating a nation of consumers, which is what's been happening in the Western world. So compare and contrast. That's a picture. You can work that one out for yourself. This was from a local school that I took this photograph just recently. There really isn't much difference. I mean, I have seen, for example, mobile learning in a classroom. Anyone see the problem with that picture? Every desk with a computer on it, where every kid with a thing, just in the classroom, teacher at the front, all those kinds of things. This is not an appropriate, when you consider what these kids then, the world in which they are going to. I mean, Michael Gove, lovely guy, he wants to turn the clock back to the 1950s because it's so much simpler in those days, wasn't it? You either leave school to go and work in the factory or you leave school to go and work in the office. Problem is, Thatcher killed off manufacturing in this country, so there is no manufacturing to go to, and actually no one wants to work in an office. So what are these kids going to do? If we are producing output from our education system for kids that expectation is they're going to work in an office or they're going to work in a factory, we have a problem there as well. I'm going to come to that in a second. So do the traditional education systems of today actually meet the aspirations of tomorrow? Well, I'm an old fart. What do I know? I have kids, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert in education or learning. So let's listen from a 19-year-old, a very outspoken young man who puts stuff out on YouTube. Called Dan Brown. Let's hear what he's got to say. I think it kind of states it quite well. iPad.
What does it really mean to receive an education? For past generations, it made sense for education to be institutionally based. Schools and universities were the hubs of all human knowledge, so that's where one went to learn. Great minds congregated at universities, grew within universities, and changed the world with universities as a launching pad. Institutional education has been a massive force for good for hundreds of years, and in no way, shape, or form am I trying to deride what it has done for society. What I am here to say, however, is that we are in the midst of a very real revolution. And if institutional education refuses to adapt to the landscape of the information age, it will die, and it should die. Throughout all of human history, there's a particular trend that has remained constant. The value of information has consistently been going down. Now, on the surface, this may sound like a bad thing, but really, it's just a natural result of society moving forward. In the age of kingdoms, areas had one supreme ruler who was the only person with complete access to information. Needless to say, information was very, very valuable. As kingdoms failed, they were replaced by systems with very clearly defined class structures. There were typically 3 groups: the aristocracy, the working class, and the poor. The aristocracy had access to information, and nobody else did. Information was still quite valuable, but not as valuable as it had been before. As time went on, these clearly defined class structures morphed into less clearly defined class structures. There emerged a wealthy, educated class with complete access to information, a poor, uneducated class without access to information, and a massive gray area in the middle where people had limited access to information. This is the system that made institutional education possible. For the first time, it didn't matter who you were born to. If you could pay for it, information was yours to buy. By and large, this is the same system we use today. If one wants access to the information a university has and can pay for it, then they're going to get it, and if they can't pay for it, they're not. But here's the thing. society is not done moving forward. And with the advent of the internet, the monetary value of information is fast approaching zero. This is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. And not only is it a good thing, it is the best thing to have ever happened to human beings. Because of the internet, information is now free. And by free, I don't just mean doesn't cost any money, I also mean that it has been liberated. Example, 15 years ago, if one was planning a road trip, they'd need to go to the store, purchase an atlas, and painstakingly chart their course. Today, you can just type it into Google Maps, or Bing Maps, or MapQuest, and you're done! There are literally millions of examples like this spanning every single aspect of society, and while we're still in the early stages, this is the revolution I'm talking about. And most societal entities are reinventing themselves to prepare for this revolution. The music industry has embraced iTunes. Governments have taken significant steps towards transparency. And successful businesses are looking less like Dilbert and more like Google. But what has education done to reinvent itself? In my experience, nothing. I mean, sure, you've started using email, online databases, services like Blackboard, and if this were 1999, I'd be saying, great! But it's not 1999, and if institutional education wants to survive in the information age, then institutional education needs to do more than just adopt a few new tools. Let me speak from my own experience. I was a student at the University of Nebraska, and most of my classes went something like this. On the first day, I'd show up, and there would be a lecture hall full of 40 to 200 kids and just one professor. Professors rarely made an effort to learn anyone's names and almost never encouraged any sort of interaction amongst the students. I'd be required to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 per class on textbooks that I would never open. Not because I didn't care, but because better, easier to find information was available online. Classes would drag on for an hour, and all they would consist of was the professor in the front with a PowerPoint telling us facts. We'd frantically scribble down those facts. Test time would come around and we would memorize our scribblings. We'd take the test and we would receive a grade based on how many facts we memorized. But society no longer cares how many facts we can memorize because in the information age, facts are free. Any educational institution based solely on providing students with facts is not preparing students for the real world. See, in the noble quest to provide education to the masses, we have lost sight of what education really is. Education isn't about teaching facts. It's about stoking creativity and new ideas. It's not about teaching students how to conform to the world as it is. It's about empowering students to change the world for the better. 2 weeks ago, I dropped out of school, not because I'm a deadbeat, not because I was failing, not because I'm not just as motivated as anyone else to make a difference in this world. I dropped out of school because my schooling was interfering with my education. It is clear to the world that something just isn't working with institutional education, and most people say that this means we need to change institutional education. But to the educators of the world, I am here today to say that I disagree. You don't need to change anything. You simply need to understand that the world is changing, and if you don't change with it, the world will decide that it doesn't need you anymore.
Well, you know, that's his point of view, isn't it? But I think, strongly put, and I think if you speak to a lot of young people about their education, there would be some similarities with the way that Dan has stressed his point there. Interesting quote there, President Obama. You know, I think that's probably accurate. I mean, it raises a lot of questions about what education is for. Is it actually to compete and all those kinds of things? We can get into a big political debate, which we can have this evening in the social. Education really, it's like the King Canute. I mean, it's sort of forcing back. It's like ignoring it. I can't hear you. I can't hear you. All this stuff is going on. It's like Dan was saying. All this disruption is happening. You know, businesses are preparing for it. The way we communicate, the way we buy things. I mean, this meeting, this gathering, the debate this afternoon is about the impact of disruption on an old video game industry and how it moves. Education, on the other hand, and particularly in the Western world, and the industrial scale education systems we put together, really is ignoring this. It's all around us, but it still is the last holdout against digital disruption, like the king there that we have. What's happening in the outside world? I mean, I was alluding to this earlier. I mean, there's a decline in Western manufacturing, mobile workforce, a decline in office. there's two major issues here, which may also explain some of the turmoil and other disruptions that are happening around the world at the moment. You know, it comes down to these two facts. Africa has the natural resources. China has the manufacturing. Europe and America has nothing. If it's not creating creative innovators, it doesn't have anything. And that's why you're seeing whole continents being subjugated so we can nick their oil. Digital disintermediation is a real key here. It's affecting things. You know, we're moving our society from a push economy of the last century where, you know, it was like, okay, we manufacture all this stuff and you buy it, to a pull economy where we have more choice. And yet our education systems aren't meeting this. We're seeing a growth, however, in the Western world in the creative digital information technology economies. This very festival is about that, massive growth, and yet our education systems are not responding to that. You're an intelligent audience, you know what the disruptive technologies that I'm talking about, the things that are coming in and changing things and affecting the way that we live in our society, so I'm not going to just read my slide. So can affordable disruptive technologies radically improve our learning? I've got a few clips. I'm going to whiz through them in the interest of time, but this particular video kind of reinforces something that Jason said in his excellent presentation earlier from a chap I know at the GSMA. So it's swayed towards Ireland, but it's got some interesting facts in there. I'll just whiz through that one.
When push comes to shove
the music's great, but I'm not going to leave that run for too much longer because I need to just finish a few other slides here. But you get the idea about what the point is about mobile then, how it's rapidly expanding, and it really reinforces Jason's earlier point that when we talk about 50 billion mobile connections, we're talking about all kinds of other things that are connected, including ourselves. To the net. You'll have seen these Morgan Stanley charts somewhere before. I mean, they've been, I put it up there just because of the guy that was slating me earlier, really. I mean, it sort of proves my point that desktop PCs are indeed dead. Laptops, of course, I put that slide there as a joke, really, because it was a slide I used in 2006. I did have a gun sign on it as well. But I do wonder why we're teaching children keyboarding skills at the moment. As you'll see in a second, the phone call's dead. I was saying earlier, we don't do that very often. Actually, we don't actually like speaking on the phone, just send me a text. Do you know what I mean? Phone calls are quite irritating and annoying. There's lots of statistics which I can point you to which show that we're using the phone less and less and less for this. The term phone clearly is an anachronistic term that we're comfortable with. The mobile app economy, we know it's huge. We know it's had a devastating effect on the traditional software industries. Everything will be mobile, as we're saying earlier, and again, this particular audience, I don't think we need to go into too much detail. What I want to do is get to the point of this talk with Napsterfication. I'm not going to tell you what the Napster of Learning is, by the way, so I'll just put you out your misery early. I want to ask the question is, what would happen if every child had an iPad or similar mobile device? And we are rapidly approaching that in many parts of the world, even in some of the developing countries that I work in, particularly West Africa. If it was a case, if every kid had that kind of connected device, what would a school look like? Does it have to look as it is? I mean, should we move towards a situation where kids stay at home to learn and go to school to play? Should a school be a theme park for learning where they do stuff rather than sit like we are here listening to someone rant? Why, as I said earlier, do we shoehorn these technologies into supporting 19th century practice? Why is the practice not responding to the technologies that are already disrupting our planet and the world in which young people are going to have to develop and compete and interact? M is mainstream. And I put a few little clips here to show off my daughter, Phoenix. She was 4 when she was doing this, and she loves her iPad, really. It's funny, actually, because my 10-year-old and my 5-year-old, they had iMacs for a while, and now they don't use their iMacs so much. They use their iPads a lot for most things. And what's an interesting thing is that on Sundays they say, oh, can we go to the App Store? And I go there, so, oh, $2.99, yes, I'll have that. $1.99, yes, I'll have that. And it's much cheaper than when it used to be, let's go to Toys R Us and go and buy ourselves a packaged product game where we have to spend 60 quid rather than £5. But she is learning a lot from this. She's been learning how to read, how to write. She's been learning evolutionary biology using an off-the-shelf game called Spore, which I'm sure you all know about. We'll play with this for a little second. I'm going to move on to something else. She's pre-literacy. She's about learning to read and write now, but this was before she could read. But she's figured out how to use the iPad without any instruction at all. And also beginning to understand things like DNA and evolution through conversation that we have as a consequence of this. Obviously upset the creationists.
Here I am, ready to get some food. Oh!
You can see she's got her father's temper in a minute. Anyway, I've got loads of different videos on here. I'm not going to show all of them because of time and courtesy to the next speaker. But this one's interesting, speech recognition. Because a lot of people sort of say, oh, yeah, but, how are kids going to learn to read and write and how are they going to engage and all that kind of stuff, keyboards, yada, yada, yada. She'd been using this speech recognition program, which was free on the iPad, for all of about 20 minutes. Now she uses it to write stories, which she then doesn't actually print out. She then started writing them down to show me when I came home from work. And she's been learning how to read and write as a consequence of that. But just want to show this little clip.
Okay, I am going to swimming with my dad. He's very nice.
It just works. out of the box. I mean, she didn't train it, and it's a 4-year-old, 5-year-old's voice that it's picking up. And I think these things are interesting because it's changed the way that her interaction with words and writing and so on. And I mean, obviously disrupted her primary school, which is still... She actually got a school report, actually, when they finished the term, and there was a nice little bit in there. It was about understanding the world and knowledge of the world. And it was, Phoenix is gaining confidence using a mouse. No shit, Holmes. I won't show this clip. It's showing how my 10-year-old has been composing using an iPad. This one's interesting. This next clip coming up here. Again, I'll show you a little bit of it. It was using Little Big Planet. The MacArthur Foundation put up a fund to use off-the-shelf video game technologies for learning, and they went as far as teaching stem cell research using, not creating any new software, but just using the platform itself.
You got nothing to do, bruh? What if I told you you could be part of some awesome research? Well, Professor G and Professor S would like to invite you to Little Big Labs, Little Big Planet's premier leader in stem cell research.
This was that it wasn't. This isn't a, if you tried to create a piece of educational software that had the same level of engagement, you'd have to spend the same sort of money it cost to create Little Big Planet. But that wasn't what happened. It's an off-the-shelf product which is being used in an educational context. And I mean, stem cell research is usually something you start thinking about when you do a PhD or at least a master's, not when you're in primary education. And that's what this is being used for, with kids to understand how, what stem cell research is all about. Using a game that they're already familiar with, an environment which you couldn't possibly create on educational software budgets. I'll do a version of this presentation with links so you can have a look yourself, and I'll put it online. So my conjecture here is schools, as they are at the moment, are done. We really need to think about what schools are. And, it's not about rebooting. We need a completely new operating system for schools. This is where I'm coming to my point about Napsterfication. The reason why I use Napster isn't, don't take it literally. I'm not suggesting that we have some sort of online pirating system for nicking Pearson's books and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the concept of what Napster meant. And I think this is also relevant to the game industry as well. Napster was something that came along and utterly changed the music industry. Completely changed. When it was launched in 1999, the music industry, and I'll show you a little clip in a second, because I gave a career-destroying presentation at MEDEM, the world's largest music conference, where in 95 I suggested that the music industry business model was screwed as a consequence of things like this beginning to appear. Obviously, it was about 4 years before Napster appeared. I got booed off stage. I mean, you've been very polite so far, but I was, yeah, thank you. That's more like it. I feel at home now. But they did not see it coming. And then the thing about disruption, you don't see it coming. It just comes, boom. Okay, Napster went bust. But now Sean Fanning is about to buy EMI. He won. Game over. Do you know what I mean? So my point is, piracy drives innovation. Piracy is not something we necessarily need to be scared of. If Napster hadn't come along, there would be no iTunes. Apple would not now be the world's most valuable company. It was as a consequence of piracy. Everything you wear, everything you're using, is somehow related to piracy. Piracy is not always a bad thing. It makes people innovate. People and technology break cartels, and that's what happened with Napster. Music industry was a cartel. It was destroyed through this technology. My point then, using Napster as an analogy, is what would the Napster of education be? What is going to be the disruptor that changes the way that we learn forever? I think some of the keys to that, the answer to that question, sit in this room, amongst game developers, amongst creative people, who can actually look at the way kids are already using the technologies that they use and take them further in that area. I think the disruption won't happen within the education superstructure, but it will happen outside. It will happen in the consumer sector, where the majority of you guys are working. So this was something that I did in 1995. And is Stuart Dinsey still in the room? No, Stuart's left. He just bought Music Week. But I was asked in 1995, as a consequence of my contrary views, to talk about the music industry and reinvent it. And this is a short clip of something that I started with, and I need some volume for this. But I managed to upset every single person in the room, which is why I don't work in the music industry anymore.
Today is the final day of the music industry.
That's the message. Anyway, that was just a bit of ego brushing on my own. But it was just the point was I was not particularly prescient in '95. A lot of people were saying that, and it took quite a while for this to occur. There was a 10-year gap before the record industry was really collapsing. It was around about 2005 when they thought, Houston, we have a problem. And I think the video game industry is going through that right now. And I think that the education industry is going to the education superstructure is going to go through that in the next 10 years. And we're beginning to see it happening, and I think some of it's to do with you guys. So on the home stretch now. Whoops. So my point was Napster disrupted the entire music industry. The music industry was in denial for a long time, even when the writing was on the wall. I know that I think Mark Phillips is in the room here. I mean, he'll remember back in the day when these conversations were going on, won't you, Mark? And I was setting up a business basically to get digital rights from the music industry. It was in denial. We did some fantastic deals in that time, actually. It's quite nice when they're in denial. Napster, of course, went bust, but Apple became the world's largest distributor of music. Who saw that coming in '95? Who saw that coming in '99? Who saw that coming in 2004? They have this thing called Apple TV. You wait till they start putting download apps on the Apple TV. That's an £89 console that does high def and has all the tablet devices already connected to it. This is a proper... Apple aren't really a disruptive company. They just spot something, and they spot something and they just do it better. They copy. That's how they started. I'm not an Apple fanboy in the sense of thinking Steve Jobs walks on water. He's just very good at stealing and then perfecting. Piracy drives innovation, and that's what they do. I don't have the answer, because if I had the answer, I wouldn't be here. I'd be sitting on a boat in Monaco. But what will be the Napster of education? It's going to happen. It will happen. The drivers for this: pervasive connectivity, the irrelevance of governmental direction of learning. Michael Gove and even the people before him, this is not a political point, it's not being, to be honest, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the politicians always win. My point is that the Department for Education is becoming increasingly irrelevant to learning, as are the schools. Kids are not going to school to learn. They are learning more from playing video games. They are learning more from social media, from creating content. Why are we teaching them Microsoft Word when WordPress is more effective? Why are we talking about ICT, which is about learning, spreadsheets, word processing, all that stuff? It's about consuming computing. It's not about creating with computing. It's bullshit. Absolute bullshit. The DFE is irrelevant. Schools are irrelevant to learning. The emergence of a digital curriculum. Now, we have to understand there's a big difference between a digital curriculum and a digitized curriculum. What we have been doing for the past 25 years, and what we are doing now, is digitizing educational content. There's a £6 million scheme that's been announced by JISC, which is one of the education bodies, to digitize educational content. Why? We just scan it and stick it on a screen, and then suddenly it's digital. It's like the interactive whiteboard. What could the video game industry do? If Latin is important, let's do a game that's really compelling, that's about Latin, but not like some didactic kind of, here's a bit of, here's a game, now a Latin question. Come on, kids spot that shit. As game designers, that's not about engagement, but you can still impart knowledge through a creative use of technology, which is what I think the people in this room do for a living. I'd like to finish with one of my heroes, and his quote: "Undermine their pompous authority, reject their moral standards, make anarchy and disorder your trademarks, cause as much chaos and disruption as possible, but don't let them take you alive." And this does not apply to the kids in London. Thank you very much. I can take questions over lunch, but does anyone? We have got time for one question, I believe. I can't see a thing, so.
Don't use superficial. Use Johnny Rotten. That was an idiot who killed himself. That's where you let yourself down.
Well, I couldn't possibly... Time are done. I can't answer the question. I couldn't possibly question. I think Sid Vicious, only from a personal perspective, really. Malcolm McLaren was one of my best mates, and John Lydon wasn't. So, but anyway, thank you for that. Anyway, do we have time for a serious question?
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, Rob.
Hello.
Very interesting talk. I just wanted to provide a bit of a caveat to what you were saying about digital education, because I still think that that would still create a sort of social structure, because in order to progress, you would need access to the internet, and therefore you would need technology, and therefore you would need money to buy something that you can access the internet with. So I still think it would create, education has to be universal first and foremost, and I think that a digital future does have flaws in that respect.
Yeah, Rob, you're absolutely right, mate. You're absolutely right. And I mean, as we were talking over the coffee break, our next festival in January is all about superstructures and how they interlock and the problems of those. I spent about a third of my year in Ghana, West Africa, looking at the very similar problems, in challenges. But one of the advantages that Ghana has is that it doesn't think that it has a good education system. It doesn't have to have classrooms like we do. The way that African children are raised is much better than the way we raise them here. I mean, you wouldn't get a riot in Ghana because the parents would be out there beating them with sticks before the police got there. But it takes an African village to grow a child. And so the notion of having to stick your kids somewhere because you're going to work to be a good citizen so they can be culturally reproduced and programmed doesn't exist. But the issue still remains in terms of connectivity and cost and so on. Some things we're looking at there is the west coast of Africa has just had a huge, very fast pipe to connect to the internet, and that's going in, and mobile is far more pervasive in the continent of Africa than any other continent on the planet. In fact, currently they're using a lot of feature phones. Nokia are very big there, but they won't be for long, because last time I was out there I was holding a $60 Android phone, and we've been talking to organisations about how we could give away Android phones to people throughout villages and so on, funded by advertising. Now, that does sound like a pretty shitty thing to do, actually. It's like, you're poor, here's Coca-Cola. And, of course, it is shitty. But it's also contextually accurate, because I don't know if you've spent any time in Africa or West Africa, but when you're driving around in your car and you stop, everyone's trying to sell you things. So there is a sort of cultural context in which that works. But you're absolutely right. I mean, if we're talking about, capitalist superstructures and everything else, and this isn't a kind of neo-Marxist statement. I'm just saying, we have to figure out how to level the playing field. But I think something that the games industry does very well is reduce the cost of access, reduce the cost of entry. I mean, if Kinect had been produced by Cisco or by even the professional enterprise end of Microsoft, it would have been about £25,000 and it wouldn't work. Do you know what I mean? And yet, it was designed as a consumer product. And so that kind of very advanced technology, I mean, you think about the technology in any of the consoles or mobile devices, because of the dynamics of the consumer industry, significantly cheaper than had they come from the sort of professional education type sector. So I think you're absolutely right, but I think it's the consumer world, the world in which you guys operate, which will actually affect that. I mean, you probably, when you were making video games, you didn't think that you were saving the world, but you probably are. Thank you.
How do you get it on the agenda? Because in Somerset and Devon, they've got a multi-million-pound rollout of super-fast broadband. 30 million is just one grant that they've brought in, and there's some match funding. And the work they've done is on demand stimulation. That demand stimulation is with businesses and how the businesses perform better. We were involved in that work. There isn't any discussion about education and stimulation for education. How do you get it on the agenda when they're rolling out the infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a good point, and there isn't an easy answer to that. Sorry? Sorry? Yeah. Apart from rioting and protesting, but I think protesting is probably good. But there's different ways of protesting, of course. But anyway, what I would say is, I mean, all I can say is what we've done as Learning Without Frontiers. The past 7 years, we've been building one of the world's largest online communities of thought leaders, innovators, practitioners, policymakers from the world of education, entertainment, people such as yourselves, and the technology world. We also hold an annual, quite a large forum. About 3,000 people turn up to that each year in London. And we do invite ministers, not just from the UK, but from global, because we operate globally. We don't just operate in the UK. And engage them in those conversations. I mean, what's happened historically is that the education world has just, like many professions, and probably even the game industry profession, spent a lot of time having conferences talking to themselves. And so nothing changes. What we've been trying to do, I mean, like say, David came along and spoke at the last one, and you had a strange combination of, and President Obama sent his head of director of educational technology. So you have someone like Karen Cater, then David Janssen from Nintendo with a graffiti artist. It's creating a new conversation. So I'm not answering your question. What we're trying to do is to start that conversation, to engaging and understanding that when you do a rollout, like you're talking about in your case, how that can be applied, because those businesses that are going to benefit from that need talent. And one of the problems that we're having in the education world, and in business in general, and in the gaming industry, is not having the talent to meet that. So there is a sort of hand in glove, but you get into these strange sort of politics. So, well, education isn't about getting a job. Education is just about understanding the world. I think that there has to be some brokerage between the loony left and the extreme right to try and understand why we learn and what learning is about. So it's not a great answer to your question, but that's what we try to do. Great. Fantastic.